suffering is not a bad thing. Suffering is something that, if we are willing to, we can offer it to God for the betterment of others.
Welcome to the Atheist Vanguard. I'm Shane Isgrig.
I'm Josh.
I'm Derek Hawke.
Let's go ahead and get right to the front lines with this interview.
Hello, my name is Ben Esteville, representing the Atheist Vanguard show. Your name, please?
Nicholas.
Hey, Nicholas. Well, we've spoken before out here at the Alamo, had some great conversations, but unfortunately, it didn't make it to air. There was an issue with our equipment, and sometimes, was it an act of God? I don't know. But the last time we were talking something about you were living the truth because you understood it, you read about the saints, you read about prophets, and you saw how lives were transformed. And I'm not going to go over that story again because you gave that interview. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about any current events? Like, for instance, what's your take on this situation in Alabama where the rights that the nation has decided on years ago, we're talking Roe v. Wade, right? We're talking bodily autonomy rights, the rights for a human person to decide what they do with their body. Any views on that from your Catholic perspective?
So I'm not aware what's going on in Alabama at the moment. I'm pretty sure you're talking about like trying to undo abortion laws, that kind of thing.
Basically, cracking down, limiting the even possibility of an abortion.
Okay.
But from a Catholic perspective, do you support contraception?
No.
Why?
So contraception, it goes against the basic identity of what that marital act is. We read in Genesis that God made humankind, male and female, and that he wanted them to be fruitful.
And multiply. I was just talking about the Tower of Babel. I asked the gentleman, I said, there's a chopper overhead, man. Audio might get dicey. I'm gonna have to speak up. There's kids screaming in the background. It's all kinds of stuff cracking off here at the Alamo. Okay, I'm gonna derail it and come back. Okay, the Tower of Babel, these people went against God's will. They were not spread out amongst the face of the earth. They came together, built a civilization. At this time, they were only believers, okay? Can we keep people from coming together and making cities? People are gonna multiply anyway, right?
So, are you asking, is it wrong to have large cities?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
So the problem with the Tower of Babel wasn't that it was a large city. It was that it was the pride of the people trying to build the tower. They didn't
want to lose their name. They didn't want their name to be scattered to the dust.
They wanted a monument that would reach the heavens and surpass even the might of God.
They did not say that in the book, that it was going to surpass the might of God. They said if they were able to accomplish this task, nothing that they wanted to do would be, there wouldn't be anything they couldn't do.
Sounds pretty prideful. And that was what made it unpleasing.
So is it too prideful now that we have all these modern cities?
No, it's a natural growth of humanity.
So at what point in time did we get an edict to stop wandering and put down roots? At what point in the Bible does it say we need to stop that stuff? Or is that not covered?
Stop wandering. Was there ever an edict to wander?
Yeah, I'm talking about the Tower of Babel. All these people were told to go out, wander to the earth, be fruitful, multiply.
They were scattered.
Yes.
Because of the languages that God introduced.
Well, that was after, but before that, their edict was go multiply and fill up the earth.
Right.
So at what point in time did we stop doing that? Because it seems like modern people are building cities and they're not wandering the earth. They're building structures to reach the heavens. There's skyscrapers that are incredibly tall. Is that prideful and against God to build a skyscraper? I guess that's maybe a question.
No, I don't believe so.
No?
I mean, the purpose of those buildings now is because we need vertical room.
So we're running out of room. But would you say we filled up the whole of the earth with believers or not?
No,
there's still some room.
I think plenty of room.
In Nebraska it looks kind of empty.
Right, Texas too. Yeah.
Texas too. There's some empty. There's some empty spots. There's only cactus. There's only cactus and coyotes.
Sure.
So we're not there yet. Biblically, we still have a ways to go to be fruitful, to multiply, to fill up the earth. And how does contraception factor into it? It would seem logically that if you have more contraception, you have less people. But is that a bad thing to have less people?
The bad thing is not the number of people. The bad thing is that you're changing the inherent nature of the act. So when God made us to be fruitful in that way, he didn't design us with with the means to like interrupt that act. It's supposed to be fruitful. It's supposed to be a gift of oneself to the other, and that gift is fruitful. It's an image of God. God who gives himself to the Son who gives himself to the Father, and in the love between them is the Holy Spirit. It's an image of the family. When you introduce contraception, it breaks the image. That's why it's inherently wrong, not because there's more or less people. If that were the case, then it would be a sin not to marry, because you're not contributing to the multiplication of people. But that's not the case.
Do you think it's a duty to multiply? When you get married, do you think you are under an obligation to multiply, to have kids?
If not to the extent that if you're not able to, you're sinful. I mean,
okay, but
I mean,
all things being, I guess, what they are for most people, do they have an obligation to have kids? And if so, how many kids meets that obligation?
I think the obligation is not that they must produce children. The obligation is that they don't interrupt the fertility of what should be there.
Let nature take its course.
Essentially.
Okay, so I got a quick question for you.
Okay.
Now I'm 46, and for a long, long time I've been hearing there are problems in Africa. There's starvation, there's overpopulation. India, the same thing. There's billions of people on the planet, but there's not enough resources to go around, okay? Do you think introducing contraception in this instance to help in that cycle of devastating poverty and oppression and sickness and want would be a good thing?
I don't.
No? Well, you would be on the side of Mother Teresa, because Mother Teresa went over to Calcutta. She went over to India and said, hey, do as you will, as nature intended. It's a God's plan. But a lot of people died hungry. And that's God's plan too?
That is what God allows, but that's not his will.
It's not his will?
He doesn't want bad things to happen, but he has to allow them to happen.
Now, I haven't read the whole Bible. Forgive me if I get this wrong.
I haven't either. So.
Is there manna from heaven? Can you sustain on manna from heaven? Have you heard about that story?
That was from Exodus, when the Israelites were wandering through the desert, yes.
Do you think it would be appropriate for all these starving people in third world countries to get just a little nibble of that manna? Just a little sip, just a little crumb. Would that be appropriate? Is that something God could do?
The purpose of the manna was to feed the Israelites, yes, but there's much more than that. It was a precursor to the coming of Christ, who is the real bread from heaven. So it's not just to feed people. It was to show Christ coming. Now we have Christ, so manna from heaven is not really it's not the plan that God has. What God's plan is for us is that we have so many resources. We have more than enough food. We just don't use it equitably. We hoard it to ourselves. All these resources that we have in the US, so much is wasted when we could use that more equitably and help people who are starving. That's the plan that we should be taking.
So you think it's good to help starving people?
Yes.
I do too. In the immediate, right now, helping people who are hungry. My own view is a little different. Personally, going forward, we should have as many people as we can reliably comfort and feed. And I think contraception will help break that awful cycle of having a lot of starving people. And I know you don't think that's God's plan, but I would personally rather see much less starving people, much less people die of starvation in the world. And I think if we did that, we would curtail a lot of STDs that are killing people in Africa. We got AIDS. That's devastating, man. So based on that, let's say two people in Africa get married. One of them has AIDS, one doesn't. Would you say you're in for contraception so that doesn't spread, or you're still against contraception? Let's say a condom.
I would be, if one has AIDS and the other one does not want that, then I would say abstinence, not contraception. Abstinence.
So going against God's plan to have sex and procreate.
The plan is not to have sex. The plan is for that sex to be fruitful when it occurs.
Would you say?
Otherwise, you wouldn't have people who were consecrated virgins in the Old Testament. So there were people who gave up their ability to marry and became consecrated virgins, or they were unmarried men, and so they offered that to God. It's not a bad thing to be a virgin. Christ himself was a virgin, and the Virgin Mary, and so many other saints. So it's not a bad thing to abstain. It's just difficult to do.
Abstaining with your wife would probably be difficult.
Difficult, but not unheard of.
So if you were in that situation where you had AIDS, and you were a guy, and you were married to your wife, what would your advice be
If
for that?
if I was
or
the
for
man-
yourself, like put
Okay.
yourself in those shoes, which I know is extremely
Sure.
difficult. But how would you get through that with your faith? How would your faith help you resolve that conflict?
If I was a married man and I had AIDS, then I would know that this was something that I need to offer to God as something that I have to deal with. This is my cross. Suffering is not a bad thing. Suffering is something that, if we are willing to, we can offer it to God for the betterment of others. If we can alleviate the suffering of others, that's good. But my own suffering, if I can bear it, that's better. So if I was this man who had to abstain from sex for the rest of my life, I would do so, as many, many men currently do.
I see. So suffering's a big issue. We're
is.
trying to alleviate suffering. My longer term plan is to have less people that would be in a position to suffer. We differ on that. How else can we prevent suffering? Do you think if everyone in this country adopted those 10 commandments, the biblical commandments, the old laws of Moses, how do you think we would decrease suffering? Do you think we would increase suffering? What do you think?
Suffering will always be here until the end of time. We can't completely eliminate it because things happen that are out of our control. Inclement weather, disease, we can't get rid of those things. There will always be some degree of suffering. But by adopting God's law, that would be a step in the right direction of creating a society, as God wanted, that would alleviate the suffering of others. That was in their code of law. They had to look out for the stranger and the wanderer, for the widow and the orphan. It's not in the 10 Commandments, but it's in their code of law. So that's what God was trying to prompt them
Well,
towards.
they can also take slaves from the foreigners around them. So they're suffering, that's an issue too. I understand that you can, according to the Bible, beat your slave, and if they don't die within 2 days, I guess that's not a problem. So there's different types of suffering in the Bible that is permitted and not permitted, and it's a whole thing. But personally, as an atheist, we're just talking here.
Sure.
We want to see, I think we can agree, we want to see less suffering. Is
Yes.
that true?
Definitely.
But you say we can't eliminate suffering.
Not completely.
Not completely. Okay. If we could eliminate suffering completely, would you be on board with that, or would you think it goes against God's perfect plan for human beings to be suffering all the time?
If it were possible to completely eliminate suffering
Yes.
from the face of the earth,
Sure.
I think that would be something that was done by God, not by man. So I don't think it's possible. But if it was, then it would have to be what God would want.
Okay, so when you think about God having the power to create a perfect heaven that people could live in, and there is or is not suffering in heaven.
There's no suffering in heaven.
No suffering in heaven.
No.
Do you think people could live in a world like heaven, but it would be heaven on earth?
Not yet.
Not yet, but there's something that needs to happen before that happens.
No, I mean, that's God's plan, is to bring heaven and earth together. Not separate, but one place. That's what we're moving towards. So at the end of time, the old heaven and the old earth, they'll be removed. They'll be gone. And so what will happen then is the new heavens and the new earth that share the same space. Revelation tells us that the dwelling of God will be with men on earth. And so heaven comes down in this symbolic way to heaven. We don't know what it actually looks like when it comes, but that will be what we're moving towards.
So that's after the Great Tribulation?
The Great Tribulation. That's more of a Protestant idea, but...
Is there an end times? Is there an end times coming before that happens?
There will be an end of time. We don't know what it looks like, but
So-
it will come.
Well, so there's going to be an end of time, and then after that, there's going to be heaven on earth?
Yes, at the end of all things, the very
Okay.
last thing will be heaven and earth as one.
So I know Jesus went about saying that the end is near, and in his time he would see people there who would experience the end of the earth, basically. He told everyone, look, you're not going to need all these possessions you have. Sell them, give them to the poor, and follow me, because it's about to get real bad. So you need to get on board with this, and if the end is near, it could be tomorrow, you're not going to need all your possessions. You need to get right with God and do what you're told. So was he wrong in saying the end of the earth was going to come in his time, or has that already happened?
Those were not the reasons that he gave for giving up those things.
Tell me about it.
Okay, so what we said was that we were in the end times, the last days, but that is this period from the time of Christ until the end of time. What differentiates that from before Christ is that before we were in the Old Covenant, we had the sacrifices of the Levitical priests to God on the behalf of the Israelites. It was the Jewish people only, not the Gentiles. The last days, the end times, is that God is now gathering all the earth to himself. That's what the church is. It's the church of the Gentiles. The Jews were the people of God that God used to bring the Gentiles to him, and now the Gentiles are here in this church. And so it's a gathering of people to himself. This is the end times. He did not say when the last day would be. He said he didn't know. But to prepare for that, we need to detach ourselves from anything that is not God and attach ourselves only to Christ. That's something that we do all our lives, no matter what we're going to see the end time ourselves or not. You do that in order to be holy, not because it's coming soon, so get ready. He said, we don't know when it's coming, so be ready.
So I see you're very strong in the faith. So how could one person understand which God to follow? Because different gods have different beliefs about the end times and the afterlife. And so how did you personally,
why am I Catholic?
How do you know that we're the end times that you're talking about in the Bible, we're actually there? How do you know that Jesus, how do you know Jesus was really Jesus and what he said was actually hold any kind of truth?
Okay. So I have no proof. I can't prove that Christ was who he says he was, and I can't prove that he wasn't. But I believe it is reasonable to believe that he is who he says he was.
Okay, well, I think that I have plenty to say. Do you want to get started, or
I
what?
just have something real quick.
Where to start?
Where to start,
quick.
right?
Yeah.
Catholics.
Okay.
Aren't they something? I mean, not
Bless their hearts.
I agree with that. Look, I love Nick. This is
No, he was
personally the second time I had interacted with him. I mean, obviously I wasn't doing the interview, but I actually saw him walking by, and when I saw him, I recognized him from a couple months ago, and I stopped him. I said, "Hey, man, we're out here again." You know, he recognized me, and Nick is a freaking awesome guy.
Yeah,
he is super, super honest. I think he seems like a person who has like the biggest freaking heart you could imagine, until it comes to these issues, you know, surrounding like contraception and stuff like that. And obviously, I don't think it's that he doesn't see the harm that unprotected sex can have on a society or an individual, but it's more that he's just kind of focusing on, you know, his side,
how it was meant to
and
be.
not really considering
regarding contraception. He said that the bad thing is not the number of people. The bad thing is that you're changing the inherent nature of the act.
Yeah, that's just ridiculous.
That is totally. I mean, this is the belief that people only have sex to reproduce,
right? Which is absolutely stupid. And
if you've reached the age of adolescence, you might know otherwise.
Right.
But
Well, also,
let's
let's just take this from, you know, his perspective. Okay, God is real, right? God is real. God created us all. And let's even say, you know, that what he said about the natural function of having sex is only to produce offspring and to be fruitful and to give yourself as a gift to your partner. What the fuck was God doing? Because if we were supposed to be fruitful anytime we give ourselves to someone else, we wouldn't have a 20% chance of getting pregnant from unprotected sex. That's the average, depending on what time of the month, what time, what body temperature. There's lots of factors that change that, but the average is 20%. And like, okay, if this was, we are biological machines, right? We are machines. So if we were to design a machine that had a purpose and it was only 20% effective at achieving its purpose, we would fucking scrap that machine. That machine would not go and be produced. Like 20%, that's fucking nothing.
Adequate analogy.
Like,
for sure.
I mean, come on.
Yeah,
that's
good.
crazy. Oh, look, hey, Google.
Perfect design.
I read a book, it was a while back, and I'm not sure if the argument still holds up, but a lot of the beliefs with sex and contraceptives actually comes back, and it's kind of an old school view of numbers. If you aren't concerned with protective steps, you're going to make little Catholics. Little Catholics bring in more money. Gay Catholics don't bring in money. It's all about the numbers, and especially if you're looking at a religion that is, it's on a decline. Whether it be just the normal evolution of the society of looking at God is being phased out. That's just it's happening. Science is growing. God is falling this life. We're also looking at a lot of discontent. What's that?
They're fighting.
They're fighting, but it's happening. Natural progress.
Yeah.
But we're also looking at just the regular, dissatisfaction of the Catholic Church in general, and I won't get into all that. But it is about they need little Catholics.
That's definitely part of it.
I think that has a lot to do with the origins.
Also,
of these
take into
kind of ideas.
consideration how many people were in the world when this was written.
Right.
Like, it would make sense to tell everybody, like, have 8 or 10 fucking kids when there are, like, 30 people in the world, right? But right now, I don't know that that's much of a problem.
Well,
like, they're
kids-
not being
at that time were an asset, and not to mention, so we have this idea in society that, like, if you have a child, that's supposed to be the most important thing and the most amazing thing, and you're supposed to love it from the second that it comes out. So from the moment of conception, you're supposed to love it and cherish it. And this idea is only from like 100 or so years ago.
Correct.
Before that, babies died in droves. More babies died than survived.
And they
More
had
babies
babies.
died than survived. How is that some kind of, how you can say that's some kind of,
What
they
kind
had
of for pro-life
pro-life
God would let most of the
fruitful.
babies die?
And they had babies to work the farm, not because they liked them.
Exactly, not because it was some love thing. Having children was a resource. Like it was workers, free work on your farm. All you had to do was feed them.
Not like today, where all they do is sit on
whatever.
fucking
Not
phone
everyone
and
lived
play
on a
games.
farm. It's whatever. If you had more kids, you had more chances of success, because back in those days, your kids didn't go off and then never speak to you again until they put you in a nursing home. It's not like today. They would grow and live with their parents for sometimes their entire lives. When the
Generational.
males would get married, their wives would move in with the male family. It's a totally different society. So like,
It's literally the opposite, because in today's day and age, like, dude, if I started like right now, I'm 21. I'm trying to have as many kids as possible. That would
get a lot.
not make me more successful if I have more kids.
No.
In fact, like, I would hope that if I told you, like, oh yeah, I'm really thinking about you, go, dude, you're fucking 21, right?
I would.
And so
I'd slap you across
thank
the
you.
face.
Thank you.
I wouldn't actually physically slap you, but
Please do.
I would be
Yeah,
terrified
my
of a
permission.
little pestilence of Shanes sweeping across the land.
Exactly. The last thing we need is we do not need as many Shanes as possible. If anything, we need as few Shanes as possible. But regardless on your stance on that, the point is that we no longer live in a society where the more kids I go and have, the better off I am. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
So without any kids, that's like the best I could be. So.
yeah.
I can't think of a better tie-in to the end of the days.
Fucking love my dog though. A lot less expensive.
Right,
Doesn't
yeah.
argue. I fucking love my dog.
Now, what of this thing about suffering? I mean, I do have a lot to say on
That's
that.
I mean, that's the meat of the thing, right? Of the whole thing.
The fact that Ben brought up Mother Teresa and
This is pretty perfect.
No, it's perfect, because what he was saying is like exactly what Mother Teresa actually believed. She believed that when she experienced suffering, it brought her closer to God, and she found that in her life she didn't have enough suffering. So what she did is, the reason she traveled around the world to all these poor places and stuff was to experience that suffering, not to alleviate it. Not like Nick is saying. Nick is saying that you alleviate suffering where you can, but your own suffering is better. That's not exactly what Mother Teresa believed. She believed that if the more suffering you experience, the closer to God you become. And the reason she went all over the place was to experience other people's suffering. And she did nothing to alleviate those people's suffering.
Right.
I mean, unless you want to say emotional support of some kind.
She actually inflicted the propagation of more infliction of pain on others as well.
Let me tie this
She
into
was
it.
a terrible person.
Word for word,
Terrible.
what he said about suffering was that suffering is not a bad thing. Suffering is something that if we are willing to, we can offer it to God for the betterment of others. Then, this is where he contradicts himself, in my opinion. He says, if we can alleviate the suffering of others, that's good. But my own suffering, if I can bear it, that's even better. Now, here's where I'm confused.
How?
If suffering isn't bad, why is alleviating it good?
Yeah. What the
Anything...
How does that follow? It does not follow whatsoever.
Yes. If you alleviate my pain, that's good, and the reason why is because pain is bad.
First of
What
all, the
kind of
question-
masochistic fucking God is this that, or not masochistic, but sadistic God that is this, that he wants you to go out and suffer, but he wants you to alleviate other people's suffering?
Oh, dude.
But
Well,
the
that's the
suffering is good, is better than the alleviating of the suffering? What the
That's
Yeah.
the essence
What?
of masochism.
What?
And that's the indoctrination at play. Because if you think about it, what fucking crazy God would accept suffering as a payment or a desire?
Well, he said so. So what he said, and this is I think a really, really bold statement. He says God has to allow bad things to happen. That I don't think I've heard anybody claim that he has to. He has to. I thought this was some all powerful being that could do whatever the hell it wanted to, as long as it,
Right.
Well, this is the essence of Catholicism: is that they mourn their religion as opposed to rejoice in it, and that's reflected in the crucifix. They show their Lord and Savior as an object of suffering and the epitome of his pain. I mean, no wonder Jesus hasn't come back in 2,000 years. If you're waving around as the symbol of his torture, I would be giving you guys a finger.
That's what I always want to know is, like, what part of the Bible makes them think that Jesus liked crosses?
Yeah.
And then, you think about the fact that they call the day that he was killed Good Friday. I'd be fucking pissed. Dude, I would be so mad if you refer to the day that they killed me as Good Friday.
Good Friday.
Fuck you.
Oh my god!
And to think, you know what? And you're raising your dead and they give credit to rabbits. What the hell is that about?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think people tagged that on.
Yeah.
That's like Santa Claus isn't part of Christianity.
I'd be jealous
either.
if I had if I've been nailed to a cross and they're like talking about rabbits. I would feel a little, you're missing the point.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I
Probably.
get that.
But would that
Well,
not
it's
prompt you to
also-
come down and correct the fuck out of the people who?
Not if you're waving
But
around
just like
crosses, me and
Christmas,
crosses.
Like, I hate to break this to Christians. That's a lie. I love breaking this to them. This idea that December 25th is the day that Jesus was born,
Well,
biblical
yeah,
scholars don't support
No,
that.
nobody
Yeah,
does.
nobody
They're
does.
only very uninformed people.
No,
don't know that.
I've had more than one person in December when they were knocking on my door
Jesus'
asked me if I wanted to
birthday.
talk about the reason for the season, and I'm like, he was born like spring, right? Like I don't like. Yeah, they don't really
Yeah.
want to get into it, but it's like, when you're convinced, it's. Anyway, the point is just that was tagged on later. Anyway.
Yeah. There's lots of crap that gets
as-
onto stuff, and generally makes it better.
As for this God of
my
suffering, different religion, technically same God, Abrahamic God. So a friend of mine who is Muslim, when I was having a conversation with a Christian friend of mine about theism in general, he said to this guy, and he speaks pretty good English. He explained to the guy, he goes, he's an atheist, and he asked him what that meaning is. He does not believe in God. And then the guy looks at me and goes, no God, who makes the hurricane? And I'm like, that's the first fucking thing you can think about if there's no God, who's making these hurricanes? That's what you're, really? That's your
Gandalf.
first sign from God? I have to say, that kind of shows that he's like, God's willing to fuck shit up.
Is that the Muslim or the Christian?
Abrahamic God, I mean, technically they believe in the same God. You could easily argue that they do or don't.
Yeah. I'm just saying, was it Yahweh that created a hurricane, and maybe Allah
who said
created
it?
the tornado, or no?
I mean, you can look at it however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
The point is, it's a fucking god of suffering, and that's why I just find it interesting that somebody can actually say word for word, suffering is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
How can you say that? Suffering isn't a bad thing? I mean, I find it difficult to imagine anyone that he really believes that. I feel like if he was suffering and you asked him, hey, would you prefer to not be suffering?
I don't think he would. No.
Yeah.
I really think he would prefer to stay suffering. Like, no, really. And this is what I mean when I say Nick is a really honest guy.
Depending on how bad.
Yeah, sure. Depending on how bad, if it was some excruciating stuff. But, like, I really believe that if Nick experiences suffering, he sees that as an opportunity to prove his faith or get closer to God.
Yeah.
Like, I
The
really
ultimate
believe he
reward.
does that in
give
his
the
life.
ultimate reward.
I don't think you're wrong.
As opposed to most of the people, as opposed to most of the people that we talk about or talk to out there, they're not living the life. I think Nick, more than anyone we've talked to, lives his life according to
Right, and
his
I'm going to tell you,
beliefs,
this is
which
where
is
I think
scary as shit.
This is where I think theism, not just religion, but theism itself, becomes very unhealthy.
Yeah.
Is anything that happens to you, you have to find a justification for why did God do this to me?
Yep.
And you might never find that, but the belief is that there is a kind explanation behind everything. Everything that happens, from child rape to genocide, all of it, there's a kind explanation behind it. I am sorry, I cannot bring myself to believe that. That is an extraordinary claim that has yet to meet its burden of proof.
Definitely.
So
that's
I'm
the
going to err on the
insidiousness.
side of genocide and child rape being wrong.
That's the insidiousness
Probably.
of indoctrination, because a lot of it's been said multiple times is that religion is the one thing that can make good people believe and do bad things. And the the really insidiousness of this is you look at the concept of heaven and suffering on earth, and that God is capable of creating a place where suffering does not exist.
Right.
And you have free will.
And that, well, you have free. That's a
Apparently.
But I'm saying both these things
But-
tied in. We're not getting back into that. But yeah.
But the concept that the earth, your time here is some type of test that you must create these certain amount of trials and
Right.
demonstrate this certain truth. That's really the indoctrination that is really sad and really hard to conquer, because part of indoctrination is that fear of suffering, internal suffering.
One of the biggest.
It all ties in together, that the suffering, if you endure the suffering now, the rewards in heaven will be great. And that's what Jesus said in the Beatitudes is, heaven is, the wonders that are waiting for you in heaven are astounding. Even the angels gasp at the treasures that await you. Just that you just have to suffer in my name and all this bullshit.
I had a pastor tell me that if you met God, like if you went to heaven for 5 minutes, you would never want to leave. Like you would never want to come back to earth. All the people that you love, like you wouldn't even care about ever seeing them again. If you have children, like, no, you met God. That's how great he is.
Yep.
And I could see how that would be very comforting, that you believe that there's a place that great that you're going to.
I met a really religious man, and I actually asked him that. I was like, so you're a believer, and say that your son is a non-believer, and when you get to heaven, you know that this person that you love more than your life, you will never see again. You will never, you will know that he's spending the rest of eternity suffering and burning and screaming and crying. How do you deal with that in a perfect, place where there's no suffering? And he said, oh, well, God will take my memory of him from him.
That's what. Okay, I've asked the same question. That's the same answer.
It's one way to deal with it. I feel
how
like
can you love somebody that would take?
Couldn't God just create a version of that person that they love that
right.
at the last moment, whatever converted, and for the person in heaven's peace of mind, not that the actual person would go to heaven, but
Or
there
just
would
simpler,
there
just
would be
not
like
send
an
anybody to
avatar
hell.
or something. of that person, so that the
Well, they say there's no sorrow in heaven, right?
Right.
So obviously, if your parents are in heaven and know you aren't, like they would feel sorrow over it. So
here on Earth, maybe just sorrow doesn't. I'm just, I'm
know
playing.
people-
I'm playing devil's advocate
No,
here.
totally.
I know
love it.
people that if their
God's
parents are
advocate.
in heaven,
Yeah.
that will be hell. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
God's advocate.
Yeah. No, and I mean the concept of hell, like I can recall not believing in it and still being subconsciously afraid of it and like realizing it later on.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, well, no, the reason fire hurts is like the nerves are being destroyed in me, but if they're being destroyed, like they can't constantly be being destroyed, or by definition they aren't being destroyed. Like I can't make any sense of it, right? So I can't make any sense out of the concepts of heaven or hell, and
Yeah, for sure, it's difficult, but
it's a god of suffering.
Yeah,
and
like always, we love to hear your guys' opinions on this kind of stuff.
yeah,
you know.
totally. Well, anyway, I think that I've gotten through to like every point that I had. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I'm good. I'm 5 by 5.
Good.
I did have one thing that I wanted to mention, and this is more of just kind of a funny thing. It has nothing to do with his arguments and stuff like that. I don't know if anyone else caught it. Maybe I just have a fucked up mind. But during the interview, Nick talks about how the act is an image of God, and God giving himself to the Son, and the Son giving himself to the Father, and the love between them being the Holy Spirit. And I mean, I know he didn't mean it that way, but that just sounds incestuous as fuck.
I mean, it's not. It's not like it would be new if there was incest in the
Yeah,
Bible.
no,
Like,
it
that wouldn't
certainly
be the
would.
only
It
case
certainly
of
would.
it.
I know
so-
he didn't mean it that
All
way,
right.
but just the way he
I
said
get
it was
you.
so funny.
All right. Well, anyway,
Can I thank you for bringing it up, because I thought I was going to do it, and I was like, I can't be the one with the dirty mind. Not
Well,
this time.
I mean, it was a little striking. It's not. It wasn't just a one-line thing. It was like at least a whole paragraph that he talked about this relationship, and I was just sitting there going like, "Oh."
I walked away so
poor
the camera
Nick
didn't
has
pick up
no
on
idea what he's
me
saying
laughing.
right
Poor
now.
Nick. Poor Ben.
okay.
Poor Ben. He's just like, you want to look, you nasty mother.
Speaking of the Bible, I think it's about that time that we get to my favorite part of the show. This is the part of the show where we address personal issues that we are experiencing in our lives, and we try to find a passage out of the Bible that can apply to every problem given by the three of us. So, Derek, do you have any personal issues that you're going through that you think the Bible might be able to help you with? God might be able to guide you through?
Jeez. And Josh can attest to this. I am terrified. I mean, strictly terrified of bees.
Yeah.
Terrified of bees.
Dangerous for other people to be around Derek when there's a bee. Like, no, there's nothing that could stop you from freaking out when there's a bee around.
Yeah, I mean,
Doesn't matter what you're
freak out.
holding. Doesn't matter if you were meeting the president. If you were meeting, not even Trump, if you were meeting the most important person in your life and a bee came around, you would slap them in the face so hard just because you're going like this.
Well, I think I threw Michelle as a shield to.
I think you did. I think you did. I think you really did. Oh, Derek.
All right, so
Thank you for not mentioning the girl like scream.
A fear of bees. What about you?
Okay, let's see. I actually didn't even have one.
I didn't prepared one either.
Let's see. So let's go with something common that a lot of people have problems with. Let's see. Let's take this and make it a male problem. Erectile dysfunction.
Wow. Okay,
Let's
so we got
see.
fear of bees, erectile dysfunction. I can't figure out like why sand dollars even exist or what they do, and I'm fucking pissed off about it because like they seem to have no purpose. So we have a fear of bees, erectile dysfunction, and a lack of an understanding for the existence of a sand dollar.
I don't.
Dude, I have no
I'm
idea.
going to make a prediction here.
They don't fucking do anything.
I'm going to make a prediction
Nothing.
that 2 of these situations will not be addressed by whatever.
Okay, you know what?
thing we flip to.
Also-
But who knows? Maybe.
Side note, if sand dollars do anything, let me know in the comments. I don't know what the fuck they do.
Please.
I have no idea
Please,
what they
because
do.
I don't want to go over it right now.
I'm not either.
I thought you were going to bring up this problem with all these little hypothetical Shanes roaming around the land.
Didn't we address that?
Yeah, we did.
We addressed
All
the
right.
hypothetical little Shanes.
Let's see what
right.
the Bible has for us.
Okay,
Okay.
so I'm going to go for a middle page,
I'll do
maybe
pointing,
hopefully
you do
a
the
proverb
Close
or
your
a
eyes.
psalm.
Close your eyes. Don't pick. You already
Okay.
picked. You already
Yeah,
picked.
I know. You start over.
Yeah, start over.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Shane. Pick. All right. We are in.
2 Chronicles again.
Chronicles again. 24:11. Now it came to pass that at what time the chest was brought unto the king's office by the hand of the Levites, and when they saw that there was much money, the king's scribe and the high priest's officer came and emptied the chest and took it and carried it to his place again. Thus they did day by day and gathered money in abundance.
How the hell is that
yeah.
inspired works of God?
I mean, what's the context here? What story are we in? Not that I honestly
The one about
can't
the
see
sand dollars.
any way that would apply to erectile dysfunction.
I think he's
Maybe get
bringing
some
Moses
gold.
out of Jerusalem at this point.
Well, Viagra's kind of expensive. You need the money chest.
Well, now it came to pass.
Okay,
You can't make anything out of that.
Yeah,
You
I guess
can't make
you can.
anything?
You can.
Yeah, you can.
That is the whole point. You can. You
came
can make
you came in the
something.
past, but not no more.
Yeah.
There's another Jesus can't fucking help you. But it's an answer.
Yeah. No.
We didn't say
you
solve the
can
problem.
find-
We said
yeah,
answer the
yeah,
problem.
yeah.
So your answer is you're fucked. Let's see. Yours was fear of bees.
Pay someone to keep
I
bees.
think Jesus fails me again.
Yeah. Yeah. That is
Jesus
the thing with the
fucking
Bible.
failed you. Well, it demonstrates that in some cases you can make it mean anything to fucking apply, right?
Yeah.
And then in some cases there's nothing you can do. And in his case, yeah, Jesus doesn't love you.
But I just looked at the random and it says Joshua again.
Well, yeah, that's a
Joshua
character. I'm not
is
surprised at this
literally,
point.
like,
but the other time was
Go
different.
again to Jerusalem with joy. So it looks like your erectile function is going to be taken care of. For the Lord has made them rejoice over their enemies. So you need to fight. You're
If I can just
that kinky where they spank you.
Yeah, if I can
Don't
just
take care
stick to
of
the
that.
first few words.
Gotta
Now
get
it
into
came to
some,
pass.
BDSM.
Maybe it came to pass means like my frustration for my lack of an understanding.
There you go.
Like if my frustration passes, then that qualifies, and that is my answer for how the Bible guided me through that problem, or at least explained my problem to me, which doesn't really fucking help.
Joshua, want to update on your problem next week.
Show
Yeah.
up at a car accident and tell everybody how injured, like just what happened. Like, yeah, you got T-boned, and just leave and see if you did anything.
Sure.
That's how helpful the fucking Bible is. All right, well, we appreciate everybody watching. If you do have the time, we would really appreciate it. What helps make this possible is if you go right down there, you click like or subscribe, or if you're fucking dope, you're gonna do both of those things.
You got to mash that like button.
Yes. Check out some of our other videos too. I mean, they're all great. Anyway, thank you for watching very much. Till next time.